I think it was John Laws who used to sing over songs on the radio, wasn't it? Anyone? No one? Wrong crowd. So great to have you here. I'm pumped to dive into this service, to this series. If it's your first time here, my name is Jono, along with my wife Chloe, the lead pastors here with a great team. And it's an absolute privilege to host you here this morning. It's a really exciting day. At the end of the service, you'll hear about some next steps we can all take. But if you're new here, we just certainly hope it's not your last time engaging here with Suncoast. Now, the idea of an eyewitness, it can be pretty loaded, can't it? Because as we try and wrestle with ideas, particularly as Jesus followers from the Bible, we're dealing with, a document that was written over 1,000 years in length. And the last letter we have written was about 2,000 years ago. And so we're reading these documentations, many of them written by people who are eyewitness accounts, at least that's what we're going to see in this series, to the life of Jesus. And so the idea of an eyewitness, and you're smart, you know this, it's someone who with their eyes witnessed an event. Is that rain? Oh, I was going to say, well, good news is we finally have the new roof on, so it's not going to rain inside. Anyways, thank you for all those who gave towards the roof. The next generation thanks you. So the idea of witnessing something with your eyes. But here's what we have now that we didn't have back when the Gospels were written. We can film things, So for over 100 years now, we've been able to film stuff, and then you could watch something technically with your eyes, but you weren't there. So that's new. That wasn't there when the scriptures were written. And then add to that, what's been happening since cameras have been invented is you can watch things in real time now. So we have live. So even this morning, many of you woke up and you're experiencing footage of new wars kicking off around the world. And although we're not there, you're seeing it. So does that count as being an eyewitness? Because I'm still seeing it with my eyes. And you're like, well, yes, but also no. And then now add to that additional layer, we have things like AI, and can we trust now what we see, on the screen? Did that really happen? Did that person really say that? There are some pretty funny AI videos going around about Arnold Schwarzenegger right now. Anyone? No. Thank you. So I'll try it on tonight's service. I'll get it. But so how do you, they will, because okay. Dear God, help. My parents, that's a good diversion. My parents just got back from about a month kicking it back in Mexico. Now, my sister and her husband lives there. Big shout out to her and her husband who often watch along online. The first thing Mum and Dad said when they got back is, we were wrong about Mexico. Said everything we'd been told about what you'd experience in Mexico was wrong. We got it all from film and media and pop culture. They had the most remarkable, wonderful times. Isn't it incredible? You hear stories from other people, but the moment you talk to someone who has seen it and been there, it changes your whole experience or your whole openness to something. And so this is what we're going to wrestle with, particularly if you've never opened a Bible before, maybe you're exploring faith, if it's your first time to church. Perhaps your ideas of Jesus, your ideas of God, you've got them, third hand. You've got them from someone else's opinion, and I get that. We all have those experiences. And you've had someone else share with you their critiques of faith or about God. But have you ever read from the source, from the people who were there, from the people who experienced it? And this is what we get with the Gospels. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the opening 4 books of our New Testament, where we read from the perspective of people who walked with Jesus. Now, imagine that. I wonder what it would have been like to walk with Jesus. To have heard the tone of his voice, to have seen the look in his eyes when he made a joke. We read about how Jesus was moved with compassion. Can you imagine seeing the tears in his eyes when that happened? Imagine of being present for when Jesus put his hand on a leper, when no one would touch anyone like that, but you were there and you saw it. Imagine seeing the look in the leper's eyes that this rabbi, who should be always ceremonially clean, willingly touched the ceremonially unclean. Look, what would it have been like to have heard his voice, to have been with him? Now, as much as we weren't there, we can still experience Jesus through the scriptures because of those who did get to see that. And what I want to do to begin today is begin with John. Now, John wrote one of the 4 Gospels, but before I get to the Gospel, he also wrote 3 other individual letters. And the opening verse of the opening chapter of his opening letter, he kind of breaks down this idea of being an eyewitness. Here's what John says. It says, that which was from the beginning, which we have heard, which we have seen with our eyes, and which we have looked at, and our hands have what? Touched. This we proclaim concerning the word of life, the Logos, the word, reason, life become flesh. We touched him. In other words, John's saying, listen, what we're writing to you isn't some abstract spiritual concept. We got to witness God in a body walk among us. We're not giving you a secondhand information of some old wives' tale or some philosophical breakdown. This is what we heard, saw, and touched. And the best we can do is write down what we experienced. So here's what I want to look at this series, is what did the eyewitnesses know that we miss? With our 21st century Western vantage point, there's a lot now thanks to archaeology and research and historians and anthropologists now that we have figured a whole lot out. And in fact, every single year we uncover more and more and more layers just from science and geography and archaeology that's helping us to discover so much more that brings our scriptures to life and unpacks the stories. But for particularly for the culture Jesus was in, the eyewitnesses we have of his life, like there was so much that they were brought up in with their Jewish culture, with ancient culture, with their backstory that we often just take for granted. So this is why it's important to kind of dig beneath the layers. And if you're a skeptic here, and I understand all the reasons why you would be, and I think it's important to be honest with your questions and your doubts. Like, can I trust these eyewitness accounts? There's many reasons why I think you can trust the eyewitness accounts that we have in the Gospels. One of the particular ones that made a lot of sense to me when I first learned about this is, what would you ever distrust someone's argument for? Usually it's because you think they've got an agenda, right? It's like, well, of course they would say that. They're getting something out of it. But for the thing that we'll experience with John and the other eyewitnesses is their eyewitness testimony to Jesus didn't give them anything. And in fact, they lost everything for it. Sharing what they experienced about Jesus didn't make them famous. It cost them their life. It didn't give them riches. It cost them all their wealth. And as we'll see from John, he was actually writing all his accounts of the life of Jesus in prison on a deserted island because of his witness of Christ. So that's just worth knowing. Like, were they trying to get something out of this? No, they were giving everything away by sharing what they thought. So why would we share about this? Why would we talk about this? Over this series, we want to learn how learning from those who saw Jesus personally helps us to experience him right here and right now. So let's jump into it. We're going to begin in John's gospel. Backstory of this particular story. John had 3 friends, 2 sisters and a brother, Mary, Martha, and their brother Lazarus. And Jesus gets word that Lazarus was sick and about to die. He takes his time, eventually gets to the town, Bethany. It is about a day's walk from Jerusalem. When he gets there, the scene is highly charged. Lazarus has died, and the 2 sisters, Mary and Martha, we're going to look at their experience with Jesus and see what we can learn. So here's how the story goes. When Martha, one of the sisters, heard that Jesus was coming to their town, she went out to meet him, but Mary stayed home. So remember those 2 names, Martha, Mary. It goes on. Lord, Martha said to Jesus, if you'd been here, my brother would not have died. Now, why would she say that? Well, prior to this, clearly she was present at other miracles Jesus had done where there'd been someone who was sick. Jesus was present. Jesus healed them. So for her scope of Jesus was Jesus can heal sick people. And so this was the basis of her objection. If you'd been here, my brother would not have died. But then she says this, but I know. So she straight away goes to something she's sure of. I know that even now God will give you whatever you ask. And Jesus says something to her that she was not expecting. He says, your brother will rise again. So at this point, Martha hadn't experienced any kind of resurrection. She'd experienced Jesus healing sick people. But this idea that her brother could somehow rise again, same to you and I, if you're there going, you'd be asking some questions. So she straight away goes to her frame of reference in which for her to understand this bizarre statement from Jesus. She then says, I know, here's that word again, that he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day. So she straight away goes to a frame of reference of understanding life and faith, and for her, scriptures, she knew it. In the Jewish scriptures that she had, which we have in our Bibles, it's called our Old Testament, there was so much documentation about the promise that in the last days, all those who put their faith in God will experience resurrection, will live forever. And so she just assumed with that frame of reference, this is what Jesus is referring to, that your brother will live again. It's kind of like for you and I today, if we attend a funeral of someone we love who's put their faith in Jesus, As Christians, you will find great confidence and hope in knowing I will see them again one day. And if you're not a Christian, if you've never known that hope, this is why I think everyone should be a Christian. Because following Jesus, you get the ultimate hope that science can't give you, that politics, wealth can't give you. You have the promise of eternity with your Creator. That is a big thought. And so this is the reference that this woman has, Martha, to Jesus, that I know I'll see my brother again one day. And then Jesus said what she was not expecting. He said to her, well, it's me. I am the resurrection, and I am the life. In other words, that great hope that someday, one day, when, is present with you, looking at you right now. He says, and the one who, say this word with me, the one who believes in me will live, even though they die. And whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Now, put yourself in Martha's shoes for a moment. You are grieving the loss of your brother, and then Jesus drops this bomb on you, that I'm the resurrection you're looking for, and if you believe in me, you will never die. So we read this, 2,000 years later. We've unpacked so much. We have the benefit of the story of not only Jesus' death, but his resurrection and everything that comes from that, right? So that's a big deal. But Martha didn't have that at that point. All she knew was her brother was dead, and here's Jesus presenting his case to her. And so in all of this, she begins with what she knows. Look, I know that God will give you whatever you ask, and I know that I'll see my brother again. So she's hanging in that realm of no, but then Jesus drops this realm of believe on her. Who believes in me, who believes. And so he asks the obvious question next. He says, do you believe this? Do you believe this? So here she is witnessing Christ in the flesh, but yet she's still posed by Jesus the question of belief. And here it stands the thing all of us must wrestle with forever. Is the difference between knowing something and believing something. Knowing, belief. And this is a tension that we'll all live in every day. And have you ever asked the question, if I just saw something, then I'd know for certain. But even those who saw it, Jesus was still like, what do you believe? Do you believe this? And irrespective of how much you and I know, eventually the goal is for Jesus to always lead us. And this is what we saw with all those who experienced him. Jesus cared not just about meeting you here, but meeting you here. And taking you and I from what we know and bringing us to a place of what we believe. So let's talk about belief for a moment. I had the opportunity of growing up in a home where belief wasn't a weird thing. I don't know, for many of you, that might not be your story. You might have been brought up in a home where belief wasn't even a conversation or experience at all. Perhaps it was negative or weird. Perhaps the version of belief and faith you had from your parents, they taught about one thing, but you didn't see them live it. And so there was some cognitive dissonance, I guess you could say, between beliefs. So it was awkward for you. For me, belief was easy. Not only was it was part of our family conversation in life. I saw my parents live it out. So there was no tension there for me. Belief was something that was a privilege and a joy and came easy to me. The knowing part came later for me as you started to think critically about stuff. I remember going to university. That was God's gift to my life, because I all of a sudden got taught that there was a whole lot I had to know that I didn't know about why I believe. And so I went with the whole process of critical thinking and asking good questions about my faith. Which, can I just say, is super important. Asking questions about your faith doesn't diminish your faith, it deepens your faith. So don't ever be scared. Look, if this is true, it should be able to withstand any kind of question asking. So don't ever hide from questions. And if you're someone who's a seeker or someone who's a skeptic, listen, bring it on. I think questions are the most important thing, and God has created you with the ability to ask deep and probing questions. So go for it. Don't hesitate doing that whatsoever. But so eventually, for the past 20 years, I was 18 when I started uni. I'm 150 now. So for the past 20 years, I hurt my back yesterday because I turned left. So I figured, So even though I've spent the last 20 years devouring books every single year about why there's good reasons to believe, and there are good reasons to believe. It's why we're running Logos Conference later this month in Canberra. It's a conference all about apologetics, which is giving a good defense or good reasons for belief. There are a ton of good reasons to believe. Eventually, we'll still come to the same point of Martha, where even though she knew all this stuff, she knows Jesus will get whatever he asks for. She knows that there'll be resurrection in the last day. Jesus still asked her, not what she knew. He asked her, do you believe this? And so there comes a point, even with all of our knowing, where eventually we will still get to that threshold where your knowing will only take you so far. And eventually our pride will have to be checked, and we'll have to step into the great unknown and to trust, to believe. Here's my point. Knowing will get us to the door, but believing is what will help us to walk through it when it comes to experiencing Jesus. Now, I encourage you to know all you can, and don't stop knowing. If you're wired that way, if you're curious, know everything you can, read everything you can, watch everything you can. Actually, be careful what you watch because you don't know, you know. But eventually we'll get to a point where you'll be posed with the same question Martha was, I should say. Do you actually believe this? Because even those who were eyewitnesses still had to choose what they believed. So Martha replies, yes, Lord. Yep. I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, who is to come into the world. What a remarkable statement. I believe you're the Messiah. Now again, what was she saying that we can often miss? I know the word Messiah has creeped its way into our public discourse. You know, you see it in movies, and songs, this idea of Messiah, you know, it's something, it's not necessarily even a religious connotation anymore. But for Martha and for the Jews and in Jesus' time here, the term Messiah came packed with expectation, because for over 1,000 years, the Jewish people were anticipating the Messiah, longing for the Messiah, praying for the Messiah, hoping for the Messiah, searching, groping for the Messiah. Like it was everything. And at this point when Jesus arrived, they were under the heavy bondage and yoke of the Roman Empire. So the idea of Messiah, like everyone was desperate for it. And so for Martha to say, I believe that you are the Messiah, that you are the one who is the ultimate answer to every problem, that you are the one who answers every deep and longing question I have, that you are the one who can give me what no wealth, no power, no army, no king could ever give me. That's massive. So I guess the question is still posed to you and I is, who do we believe Jesus to be? Because what we believe, you can go to that one, what we believe about Jesus will help shape how we experience him. Think of that for a moment. So when Jesus goes, do you believe all this? She straight away went to what part she believed in. She said, I believe that you're Messiah. You are the answer to everything. You're not just an add-on to my religious experience. You are the point. You are the reason. You are the pursuit. You are the ultimate longing of my life. So that's what she believed about Jesus. So let me ask you, when it comes to what you believe about Jesus, a good way of testing what you believe about him is what you're experiencing. So what are you looking for when it comes to Jesus? Is he your last resort? Do you believe he's a good SOS? And let me just say, he is a great SOS, and he's so secure, you know, he'll be your last resort. He'll be the one that you can pull in case of emergency. He'll play that role if he has to for you. He loves you that much. But you're missing out. This idea of believing that Jesus is the Messiah will completely shape how you experience him, how it sets up your expectation, your longing, what you're searching for with Jesus. So let me ask you, what do you believe about Jesus? Who do you believe him to be? Now, I'm not making any promises of saying like, you know, so if you believe he's X, Y, Z, that's exactly what you're going to get. I will say this though, your belief will shape how you experience and how you pursue him. No doubt about it. So for instance, one of my favorite authors ever, and if you've been around for any amount of time, you'd know this because I quote from him all the time, from last century, C.S. Lewis. He was an incredible Christian thinker and theologian, philosopher, and author. And he tragically lost his wife early, and processing the grief of losing his soulmate, the love of his life, he did what he always does best. He processes it by writing out his feelings. And so as he was processing his grief and his questions, and his faith was dealt a huge blow. And grief has a way of doing that like almost nothing else can. And if you're someone who's walking through grief right now, or been through grief, you'd nod your head going, yep. And when you've lost either a loved one, or if you've lost a future expectation or hope for something in your life, losing something. It's actually C.S. Lewis, funny enough, who said, it's hard to see anything clearly when your eyes are blurred with tears. And so grief has an impact on faith like almost nothing else can. And so in processing his grief, he wrote this, we have now the gift of this amazing book called A Grief Observed. And he writes this about when he was thinking about his faith and where's Jesus in his grief. Here's what he wrote. He said, "It's not that I think, in much danger of ceasing to believe in God. The real danger is of coming to believe such dreadful things about him." So grief didn't cause him to doubt that God was real. It's just, he was having a battle then of what do I believe about him then? Because again, what we believe about Jesus will shape our experience. And so for C.S. Lewis, I'm giving you the end of the book. Still read it yourself. But for him, he recognized what he believed about Jesus in his grief would either lead him to despair or to hope. And it's remarkable to me that even the question that the eyewitnesses were posed, what do you believe, is still for you and I today. What do we believe? Because what we believe about Jesus will ultimately lead us in a path somewhere. And for Martha, she went, "I believe that you are Messiah. You're the answer to every question. You're the answer to the hope I'm looking for. You're the one I'm going to trust in with all of my life, and I'm going to put all my hopes on you." And that's Martha's experience. But what about Mary, who stayed home? Well, eventually, she comes out, and it goes on. She said she eventually reached the place where Jesus was, and she saw him. And she fell at his feet and said, "Lord," recognize this line? "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." So she opens up with exactly the same line that her sister did. Why? Because that's probably exactly the conversation that were happening in the house together. If Jesus had been here, yes, if Jesus had been here, misery liked company. And so they were wrestling with exactly the same grief. So Martha approaches Jesus with the same question, and she goes straight away to what she knew. She goes, "I know that even now God can do anything you ask." But Mary was different. It says, "If you had been here, my brother would not have died." And Jesus sees her weeping. And then he looked around at all the other people who were with her, and they were also weeping. And because of all the crying, Jesus was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. I want you to think about something, so stay with me. When Martha got to Jesus, she said the exact same thing that Mary did. "If your brother had been here, he would not have died." But then Martha went on to process her grief through what she knew, and Mary processed her grief through tears. So Martha approaches Jesus and says, "Even now I know. Something inside my head says still, I know that God will give you whatever you ask. And I know he'll be resurrected on the last day." We didn't hear any of that from Mary. Mary just came crying. And both of them were processing their life's experience uniquely to how they were wired and to who they are as people. But yet they both still went to Jesus, and here's my point. The safest place for us to process all of life's events are always at the feet of Jesus. Jesus didn't rebuke Martha because she went to that cognitive space. Jesus didn't rebuke Mary because she was being overly emotional. There is safety, whoever you are and wherever you're processing your life's events, at the feet of Jesus, like Mary did. Now that term "feet of Jesus" was a rabbinical term. It simply meant someone who would be a disciple. So if you were to sit at the feet of a rabbi, you were considered their disciple. And so for Mary, I love this picture. Mary threw herself, that's what John records, at the feet of Jesus. You can be a follower of Jesus and express it through being someone who is cognitively wired or someone who is emotionally driven. God doesn't ignore either one or anything in between. However you're wired, the safest place for you and I to pray, at least this is what the experience of Mary and Martha can teach us. The feet of Jesus is always a safe place for you to bring whatever you're going through is to Christ. I love this thought that ultimately the difference is that we see here that we want to point for this story isn't just the difference in what the sisters did, but as we're going to see, it's what Jesus did. So Jesus goes on as he sees everyone weeping, and he asks the question, "Where have you laid him? Where's Lazarus, your brother who's died?" And they said, "Come and see." And then Jesus wept. Fun fact, it's the shortest verse in the whole Bible. To me, it's remarkable. Same Jesus, same heartbreaking situation, but to each individual, Jesus gave a very tailored experience. To Martha, he gave truth, because she was straight away in that space of, this is what I know, this is what I know. So he said, I'm the resurrection and the life. He gave her truth. This is what Martha got. And because that's where she was at. She was someone who processes things cognitively. Might be like some of you. You might be married to someone like that. You might have a child like that. No matter how much emotion you have, it won't move them. They are a rock. Anyone married to someone like that? If you got one tear from them, that's a miracle. Anyone? I'm not afraid to say it. But to Mary, Martha got truth. What did Mary get? She got tears. No argument, no theological explanation, no big truth bombs like Martha got. Jesus just wept with her. And so if you'd ask what Jesus is like, and you'd ask different eyewitnesses, the incredible thing is every eyewitness will tell you something remarkably unique. Martha was like, for me, Jesus met me right where I was at. I was wrestling up here at this big cognitive level, asking big questions about eternity and the meaning of life and purpose and why are we here and who is God and what's the purpose of all of this. And Jesus met me right there, and he dropped some truth bombs on me. Mary wasn't asking any of those questions. She was just feeling it. She'd lost a brother. She didn't have any questions. You couldn't drop theological Bible verses on here. It would have made him more upset, So here's just a little shout out to anyone. If you're married to someone who's a crier, just don't try to reason it out with them. Just cry with them, okay? Okay. I saw an ad the other day about, I don't know, like Dunlop tires, and I cried or something, I have an issue. At times, you and I need the response he gave to Martha, and at times, you and I need the response he gave to Mary. There are times where Jesus will show us truth. And I love these times. Let's throw that slide up, because this is really important for us to understand. Even if you're the most emotional person on the planet, you and I still need truth bombs from time to time. And this is so important to understand about Jesus. Why I love the fact that he's still so offensive 2,000 years after he walked the planet. Because in an age, it's not even the age of reason now. Arguably, sociologists call this the age of post-reason. Because it's not so much what's true that survives anymore. It's what the mood is. And in a world where it cares more and more about the mood than about truth, Jesus' claims to truth are so radical. And I love that, because he's showing a part of who he is. Look, do you believe that I'm actually the Messiah? Do you believe that I'm God come in a body, that I am here now? He is the one who can correct our wrong thinking. He's the one who can lift the fog of us when the clouds of our time kind of cloud whether we can see clearly about what is true and what is not true. So there are times where Jesus needs to reveal truth to you and I, where he needs to meet you on that level that corrects your wrong thinking, corrects your false ideas, correct maybe where we've hung on to a lie instead of a truth. But there are other times where Jesus will just show us grace. And this is important, where you're not in a position where to receive some truth bombs. You need to know that his kindness is for you, that his love is all consuming, that he's patient with you, and that you could experience the unmerited, undeserved grace of God. And what does this tell us? The fact that Jesus is able to show us both truth and both grace, as he did to Martha and Mary, it showed us this, that Jesus was fully God, but he's also fully human. Both of them simultaneously. And this is what the sisters, Mary and Martha, would tell you. There was something absolutely divine about who he was that no other person could carry himself like. He was the one who could raise people from the dead. He was the one who could stare the powers of the day in their face and not be intimidated and not be afraid. He's the one who willingly sacrificed his life, not for those who agreed with him and believed him and loved him, but willingly laid his life down for his enemies. Why, if he was not the creator of all things and sees all human beings as children worth giving his life for? He was God, but he was God in a body. He was the only one who could do it. He was the only one who could sacrifice his life for mankind because he was the only one perfect enough to live a sinless life. So he walked fully human, which means he relates to every emotion, every tear, every doubt, every confusion, every frustration. Jesus gets the picture fully because he's fully human, but he can also do something about it because he's fully God. This is what Mary and Martha would say to us. Scripture gives all these contrasting pictures about what Jesus is like. One of my favorites is referring to him as both a lion and a lamb. He's the lion of the tribe of Judah, victorious, conquering king like a lion, but he's also the lamb that was slain, someone who sacrificed his life for mankind. My favorite author from antiquity, Augustine, put it this way. He said, Jesus endured death as a lamb, but he devoured it as a lion. Isn't that a great picture? But again, this is the different experience between Mary and Martha. So if this is the case of Jesus, can bring truth and grace, fully God, fully man, lamb and lion. This highlights how you and I can experience Jesus, both, say with me, cognitively and emotionally. You can experience Jesus intellectually and experientially, and everything in between. Those who experience Jesus with their own eyes, and John would tell us here, that at times, if you need absolute truth, Jesus is where you'll find it. And at times you need the embrace of the divine to offer you comfort like nothing else in this world can give, you'll find it at the feet of Jesus. If you're someone who's wrestling with ideas and questions up here, take them to Jesus. If you're someone who's wrestling with the grief and loss and anguish and despair in here, take it to Jesus. He's the one, the lion and the lamb. So what are we supposed to do with this? Eventually, Jesus did something that emotion or reason couldn't fathom. He did something extraordinary. He rose their brother from the dead. He called out Lazarus from the tomb. He'd been dead for 4 days already. Massive moment. Little did they know it was a foretaste of what would come barely a week later as he entered Jerusalem. Himself was crucified and then resurrected. So what are we supposed to do with this story of a God who can meet us here and meet us here, but then do things that just you can't box in? A God who rises from the grave. What do we do with that? Well, John kind of gives us an inside scoop about what the first eyewitnesses did. It says, therefore, many of the Jews who'd come to visit Mary and had seen what Jesus did, they threw their hands up and went, we believe. We believe. What else can I do? What else can I do? I believe. But some of them, they went to the Pharisees. Pharisees were the elite ruling religious class in Israel of the day. Jesus was a threat to their power base, a threat to their authority. So when they told them what Jesus had done, their plan was, in the next verse, or a couple of verses later, that from that day on, they plotted to take his life. That's two pretty different responses to someone being raised from the dead. Over here, we believe. Over here, let's get him. So, what about you? How are you responding to Jesus 2,000 years later? Why would John record these events? And what would the eyewitnesses tell us to do with this remarkable series of events of a God who took on the human form and walked among us and did incredible wonders, but then did what no one was expecting, died for the sins of the world, and then defeated death, devoured it like a lion, and was resurrected? John would say this as he finishes the end of his book. He says, Jesus performed many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not recorded in this book. And by this book, he wasn't meaning the Bible, because there was no the Bible at that point. He meant what he was writing, his letter. But, last verse. These are written that you may, say this word with me, believe. That Jesus, like Martha said, is the Messiah, the Son of God. And I love this, that by believing, here's the point, you and I may have life in his name. That by believing, you and I could have life in his name, that by believing in Jesus, your life may experience something that nothing else in the world could ever give you. That no wealth, that no toy, that no other human relationship, as much as they can all bring some form of life, there is a form of life, there is an experience that you and I are invited to have. And you don't need to pay for it. You don't need to work your way towards it. You don't need to behave your way for it. You need to believe for it. And that by believing in Jesus, that he is the Messiah, you may have life in his name. And it's not just the life that you can experience after death, as extraordinary as that is. The idea of life is that you could experience it right now in the middle of your frail existence, where our bodies can experience sickness and broken bones, where we experience betrayal by people. We're in a world where there's corruption and where we don't know what's going on in the world, and there's wars and there's sick. In the middle of all that, through faith in Jesus, you and I are still promised life in his name. So my question is, what kind of life is your belief giving you? Your belief. Your belief. Not what kind of life has your job given you, your income given you, your family background, your education. Not that. What kind of life is your belief giving you? I've come that they may have life, and life to the full. So maybe for some of you this morning, I'm hoping, and through this year, I really am hoping this. We pray for this. I pray for this every day for you. That your view of Jesus, your experience of Jesus would be just, the box would be exploded. That you wouldn't box him in. If Sundays is kind of where it's at for you, and this is it, this is where your experience is limited, nothing wrong with this experience. It's just not the whole experience. It's just a foretaste. It's about your life. And is your faith, your belief thing, is that just boxed into a certain time and place? Listen, I'm praying and hoping that your belief in Jesus would spill out into every part of your life, that you would experience life in his name. If you're wondering, well, what does that look like? I want to invite you back to next week as we continue to explore what that looks like. But this morning, for some of you, maybe you have never, ever believed in Jesus. You never believed in him. And maybe you didn't even think you would, but here you are, you found yourself here today or watching along, whenever you're watching along, and you found yourself going, well, heck, I want to believe. I might not know everything, which is totally fine, because guess what? Neither do I. And that's the point. What do you believe? And so this morning, I want to pray a prayer, and I'm going to ask everyone in this room today, and even if you're watching along online, to pray this prayer together out loud. But this prayer is specifically for anyone here that's never believed in Jesus. And what do I mean by believe in Jesus? It's believing that you can know life in his name. Believing that through his death, your sins are forgiven, and that through his resurrection, you can experience eternal life. And you can begin that today by saying your own prayer in your heart that I want to follow Jesus. So I want to ask this morning if we can all bow our heads together just to create 30 seconds of privacy for anyone here that this is, I know for many of you, this prayer is a common prayer for you, but some of you, this could be the first time that you're praying a prayer to follow Jesus. And just before I pray, so I know who I'm including in this prayer for the first time, I want to ask you to do something just very real. If you want to acknowledge before God, but it's a way that I can just see who I'm praying for, that you want to pray a prayer to believe in Jesus today for the first time. You want to be included in this for the first time in your life. Could you do something brave? Just lift your hand up high. I just want to acknowledge it, and you can put it straight back down again. It's not to embarrass you or to shame you, just so I know who I want to include in this prayer. Thank you so much, sir. That's awesome. Thank you so much down the front. That's awesome. I don't want to miss any hand here. Just put it up high. I'll see it, and you can put it straight back down. Acknowledging that, God, today I'm making my decision to believe in you, to follow Jesus, have my sins forgiven. Maybe you feel like I need to know more. I haven't got all the story settled in my mind. That's totally okay, but you can still decide today to believe in Jesus. Last time, look across here. Put your hand up high. I don't want to miss it if I haven't seen you yet. I'm going to pray together. Maybe you need to recommit your life to Jesus. That if you're real, you haven't been following him, and Jesus has been something you've kept for emergencies only, and today you feel challenged. I want to bring him into the center of my world, and you want to recommit your life to Jesus and acknowledge that before God today. If you put your hand up high as well, I'll see you and we can pray together. That's awesome. Thank you so much, mate. You're worth waiting for. Let's pray this prayer together. Say, dear Heavenly Father, thank you for your love. Thank you for the life that is promised through Jesus. Today I decide to believe in Jesus, to follow him with all my heart. Amen. Hey, God bless you. Thank you so much for praying that prayer. You're awesome. I'll hand it over to Stephen. Thanks, guys.